The year was 1990. I was around the Washington, D.C. area, specifically Arlington, Virginia. This was during the crack epidemic. Whole neighborhoods had been turned into ghost towns. People were either dead, in jail, or had fled. I was young, maybe 16 or 17 at the time. Now, I had this twisted childhood, and this led me to associate with a particular sort of crowd. I crawled out through my window and hung out with these people in a parking lot just about every night. The police weren't around. Hardly anyone was around back then. It was a complete vacuum of power. With the city in chaos, the only real power in our neighborhood was us. We called ourselves the GQ Boys, which was a reference to a magazine that I'm not even sure still exists. We got drunk nearly every night. People would bring wine or weed. People brought just about everything. And if you didn't want your car broken into, you'd better be on good terms with the GQ Boys. We did it all. We walked people to the subway. We arbitrated disputes. We mediated negotiations, and we kept other factions from encroaching, but mostly, we got drunk. At the time, there was this guy that we would see fairly regularly, Robert, or Robbie as he was known. He wasn't from our neighborhood. He came around every now and again to pick up his kids. He'd split up with his wife prior to the story, and he would swing by to pick them up or drop them off occasionally. Wasn't much for us to think about. We'd seen his type before. Every now and again, he would talk to us. A bit of nervous energy, I think. He would see us and wave, engage in small talk. Looking back, I should have questioned why he was picking up his kids at 11 p.m., but I didn't flag anything with it being teenage me. Also, sometimes he would seem a bit high. It wasn't crack, but something, although we weren't paying a majority of our attention to this fellow. So one day, he comes out with his daughter. She was 7 or 8. Don't really remember, but older than 6 and younger than 10. I know that he had an older son too, but he didn't have his son with him that day. He waved, we waved. He got in to start his car, but had trouble turning it over. A minute later, he walks up to us and says, "Hey guys, can anyone give me a jump?" I remember being particularly annoyed by this. This was after a bottle of cheap red wine, and my ass was numb from sitting on the curb for the last hour. I didn't really want to stand up, but the man needed a jump. That night we had around 10 or so people. Some of the older crew and Nick, a good friend of mine, a true legend in our group. But on the curb, I had 2 people right beside me, Eddie and Kirby. I'm not sure what Kirby's real name was, but we always called him Kirby. Eddie was a nice guy, older than me and wore his heart on his sleeve. He said, "Yeah, we'll give you a jump." Eddie pulled his beat-up caddy around, and the guy pulled out some jumper cables from his trunk. They popped their hoods and started messing with his engine for a little bit. I'm not entirely sure what they talked about since I was involved in something else. I glanced over occasionally, and they seemed to be getting on well. After the cables were connected, he went to start it, and it started up just fine. Older cars made a lot of noise when the hoods were popped open. Modern cars, not so much. But I remember glancing over and seeing smiles. Smiles and words drowned out by the roar of both engines. Robbie's daughter was saying something, trying to get his attention, calling out from the open window of his car. Not sure what it was, but Robbie didn't seem to hear her. Eddie and Robbie talked for a bit, and it seemed like that was going to be the end of it. Robbie closed in on Eddie to hear him better, and they were smiling and gesturing. Robbie's daughter got out of the car and walked to the front of it. She was still trying to get her dad's attention, but she didn't see the cables that were connecting both cars, so she tripped over them. The cables jarred a bit and popped off the battery. She slouched over on the sidewalk and then stood up, brushing herself off. I remember that I was thinking, no harm done. Car started, she's just helping them clean up. When she was done standing back up, she was right in front of Robbie. He said something that I couldn't hear, but he seemed annoyed that she was interrupting. She looked up at him, and he slapped her right across the face. Here's the thing. When a parent slaps a child, this may not be true for your generation, but it was true for mine. Parents, when they wanted to discipline their child, they held back. When the situation called for a physical response, which was extremely rare, still, the move was to hold back. A mother, angry at her child and wanting to slap them, they would bring their hand in an inch from their face and just tap them. Most people didn't see it as a way to inflict real injury, just to convey frustration, and let the child know that the parent is serious. Even at my age, I'd seen it many times before. Most adults know their strength. They adjust for it. If they decide to strike their child, they scale it down, way, way down, so that it could hardly be called a hit at all. This hit was not that. He slapped her across the face so hard that she lifted up off the ground and came crashing down into a prone position. And that's something I'll never forget. Everything which had transpired that night was what I would consider uneventful up until that moment. Seeing that little girl launch into the air from his slap? Well, it must have bothered me. I stood right up and walked over. She was crying because she had just been hit. But I wasn't really paying attention to her at this point. I was trying to shake off my own drunken stupor and get a handle on the situation. Eddie raised his voice. No idea what he said over the sound of the engines. But here's the thing about Eddie. He's the type that is hyper-emotional. Usually in day-to-day affairs, he would look to me to see whether or not he was overreacting. But what he didn't realize is that sometimes I would look to him to try to get an idea as to how I should feel about something. At this point, his face was nothing but shock and horror. Kirby was just a fucking mind reader. He didn't see anything that had happened, but he saw me stand up, so he stood up as well. Robbie glanced at me, concerned that he had drawn attention from the crowd. It wasn't just me, but I don't really remember who else was there. His daughter stopped crying and stood by the driver's side door, just watching and holding her face. The first thing I thought to myself was, holy shit, how could she take a hit like that and still have enough balance to stand up? Kids are made of rubber. I didn't say a word. I just walked up. Eddie looked at me and then looked right back at Robbie. Eddie started shouting a slew of curse words that I really don't want to type out here. Robbie started yelling something about him minding his own business, and when Eddie looked back at me, I knew what it meant. It meant, are we doing this? Unconsciously, I had moved into a flanking position. Kirby, that fucking mind reader, had moved to the other side and was smiling at me. Not even sure that he knew what was going on. I remember thinking, yep, here we go. I remember pushing in to grab the guy while he was bringing his arms up. I was going to try to grab both arms and hold him in place, but he struggled out of it, so I had to just grab his left arm. Kirby was a lot stronger than me, so he grabbed the right and hooked the guy's neck. When Eddie started laying into him, he became really difficult to hold on to. A couple of times, Eddie accidentally hit me in the shoulder. The engines were still running, but I could hear the guy moan with every strike, and after about 5 seconds, the guy was just spaghetti on me. I tried to keep him up, but it was no use. I held up a hand to Eddie to tell him to stop so we could lower him to the ground. Then we all joined in and kicked him for a while. I just couldn't get over seeing that kid fly up into the air like that. It really bugged me. Well, at least it bothered me and Eddie. I think Kirby was just high and wanted to be included. After a few minutes, the guy had half crawled under the car, and I looked over at his daughter. I said, "Hey, I'm really sorry about that," which I know isn't the best thing to say after a moment of violence, but it was all I could think to say. My friend Nick jogged over to us and took control of the situation. Eddie and I walked back over to the curb and sat right back down. They figured out which apartment her mother was in, and the mother eventually arrived to collect her. Robbie, on the other hand, stood up and ran across the street. Not sure who he knew over there, but we made no attempts to stop him. After shepherding her daughter back inside the house, the mom, who I'll refer to as that since I never learned her name, asked us what had happened. We told her. Eddie did a much better job articulating than I did. He was always the more social of the bunch. I barely spoke, but after all these years, I really wish I did. I really wish I could have spoken to that little girl directly and said, "Hey, this wasn't your fault. This was your piece of father's fault. Fuck that guy." If this is what that little girl had to go through out in public, I can only imagine what she was dealing with behind closed doors. I know that beating the brakes off of her dad likely didn't stop that avalanche from going downhill. But I truly hope that at least some lessons were learned that night, and that bro had second thoughts about putting hands on anyone, not just a child, but anyone after that. In high school, I was bullied and raped by a man who I now have to see on the news nearly every single day. I'm a little over 55 now, but 40 years back, I was a freshman girl in my local high school. He was a sophomore boy who moved into a house down the road from mine. We lived in a somewhat rural area, and the bus would let us off at the same stop, and I had to walk about a half a mile to get home. He had to walk past my house every day, so whether we wanted to or not, we ended up walking from the bus stop together the entire way. It was the worst few minutes of my life, every day. The kid seemed nice enough when it all started, but within a few weeks, he would spend the entire walk relentlessly bullying me. He would call me fat, a bitch, say that no man would ever love me, and that I'd be alone forever. And it eventually progressed until he was telling me that I didn't deserve to be alive. It was terrible. Every day I tried to avoid taking the bus home, and it made me sick to just get on it. But I didn't exactly have any other choice. One day, in the spring of my freshman year, he finally did it. We were about a quarter of a mile down the road. There was this old broken shed that was pulled back a little bit off the street. This boy told me that he wanted to show me something. I didn't want to go. I don't know why I didn't put up more of a fight, but by the time he was pulling my arm, I was scared. When we got into the shed, he threw me on the ground and forced my clothes off. I tried to fight him at first, but when it wasn't going my way, I guess I gave up. We were both naked, and he climbed on top of me. I still remember the way he smelled when he put his face on top of mine and told me to sit back and relax. He kissed my neck while he entered me. I cried. He wasn't wearing protection, and it hurt a lot. He thrusted and thrusted until he finished inside of me. I was crying and bleeding at this point, and what I did next, I think scared him. After he finished, but while he was still on top of me, I wrapped my arms around him as if to cuddle, while I cried. I guess I was just so desperate for a hug after what had happened that I couldn't control myself. Then I threw up all over the both of us. He immediately pulled back, slapped me and called me gross, then took my shirt up off the ground and used it as a rag to clean the vomit off of his chest and the blood off of his nether regions. Then he calmly and coolly put his clothes back on and left me there crying on the ground. I sat in that shed bawling for probably an hour or so, and then was able to gather myself and go home to an empty house. I cried some more as I showered the hottest shower of my life. I was able to tell a therapist about this a few years back, so I don't blame myself that much anymore, but I did spend years wanting to take my own life. That boy never spoke to me again, but I still had to see him all the time, and every glimpse that I caught of him made me sick to my stomach. Over time, I thought that I had compartmentalized this enough to just move on with my life. But then the worst part came just a few years back. I was watching the local news, and they were doing a report on my rapist. Within a few months, he was famous throughout my county, and it was hard to consume any type of media without seeing him front and center. Within a couple more years, he was someone you'd see on the national stage. I saw clips about him on CNN, and every time I saw his face, it transported me right back to being 14. Today, many of you, including the most political savvy people out there, you likely know who this guy is. If you lived in my region, you'd probably love him just as much as everyone else does here. I've seen comments on Reddit praising him, enough that it's made me want to leave the site completely, because apparently nobody knows this man like I do. That's my confession. I've repented for my sins, and I hope that one day he'll have to think of all the horrible things that he did to me. Maybe someday he'll break down and apologize, although I'm not holding my breath for that. Edit. I came back to my post and I see that there are a ton of comments. Thank you all for the support. The most common comment seems to be people wanting me to out him, but I'm not going to do that. I want to leave this in the past. I don't want reporters showing up to my door. I don't want my name to get out. I don't want to be called a liar and be controversial or political or anything. I just want to live my life to the best of my abilities. Trigger warning before I begin. If you're sensitive to vile things, you should probably just skip this story altogether. Save yourself the secondhand trauma. I don't have anybody in my life to share this with, so internet anons, buckle up. I thought that I had a very particular fetish, but I was terribly wrong. I fucked up really badly, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to bounce back from this. So like many young modern men, I enjoy pornography and partake in it semi-regularly. There's of course a lot of porn out there, and I'll confess that the normal stuff started to get kind of boring to me, and I began branching out into some more extreme but legal genres of porn. Eventually I stumbled upon scat, and to be very honest, it was hot, and I ended up enjoying it a lot. Something about watching a beautiful woman with a nice round bottom pinch off a large loaf really turned me on. I'm not exaggerating when I say I spent almost 2 years of my life watching primarily scat-focused porn. Well, as I got more and more into it, the more I wanted to experience it myself. I tried finding women who were into it, but they seemed few and far between. Eventually, I found an escort who specialized in extreme fetishes, and she was super hot too. But gorgeous and paired with focusing on extreme kinks. She was going to be expensive. I knew I wanted this though, and because I'm not super rich, I took out a cash advance on my credit card and put it together with my savings. I contacted her, scheduled an appointment, which happened to be last month on the 15th, and paid for a hotel room and her flight to my city. I even took time off of work the Friday beforehand just to prepare. I was so excited that my heart was racing, waiting for her to show up at my room at 6 o'clock on the dot. She came up, we made conversation, all while I grew more excited. Finally, the time came. She grabbed her suitcase, opened it up, and pulled out a large plastic sheet, and she laid it over the bed. She told me to lay down, get undressed, and get comfortable, and she'd change in return. I did as I was told, and I was excited to do so. After what felt like forever, she came back into the room wearing a leather corset, thigh-high boots, and no bottoms. She asked if I was ready. I was so aroused at this point that I couldn't even speak. I just nodded. She got on top of me in a 69 position and told me to eat the groceries. I ate it like my life depended upon it, all while she stroked me. It was amazing. Then she asked if I was ready to move on to the main course. I moaned an excited yes, and that's what caused her to put her entire ass over my face, carefully lining up the hole with my mouth. The next part almost happened in slow motion. I started to see it open up. As it grew wider and wider, I saw a look slowly start to make its way out. Up until that point, my excitement just couldn't be contained. But the moment that hit my mouth, I knew that I had made a terrible mistake. Instant sensory overload in the worst ways imaginable. The feel, the smell, the taste. It all made me gag. Then she moved her ass over my chest and continued to expel. Once she was done, she sat down full weight and started smashing it and spreading it over me, all while continuously playing with me. At this moment, I was fighting the urge not to puke. Tears of shame, sadness, and disgust filled my eyes as I fought the urge not to cry like a baby as well. Eventually, I finished in her hands, even though I wanted no part of this anymore. She smeared my seed and what was coating my skin together before putting it near my face and compelling me to lick it off her fingers. And most disgustingly, I felt the need to impress her, that I'd spent far too much money, time, and effort on this to back out 3/4 of the way through. Then we went and showered, and she threw the plastic sheet in a garbage bag, took the envelope of money. We had some brief conversation and she left. But the moment that door clicked shut, I immediately broke down crying. I brushed my teeth for what felt like forever and raided that minibar, just trying to forget what had happened. I found out the hard way last month that I don't have a scat fetish. And honestly, I feel mentally broken over that night. I know it's been a short period of time since, but I don't know mentally if I can overcome this. I've been really struggling with depression and some rather dark thoughts since that night. I made an appointment to see a therapist. First time I've ever done this in my life. and I can only hope that it'll help. Because mentally, I'm not right, and I don't know how far over the cliff this experience just pushed me.